Welcome, PSJA family. I'm Laura Davalos, Assistant Superintendent for Technology, and it is my honor to kick off our fifth annual Virtual Technology Conference. This year's theme, We Ignite EdTech Heroes, celebrates the everyday superheroes in education, you, our PSJA educators. Over the years, technology and instruction have transformed our classrooms in ways we once only dreamed of. We've seen innovation flourish, student learning soar, and the new possibilities emerging in every school. Today is about continuing that momentum, a day of learning, sharing, and inspiring one another. So we welcome you to a day full of learning in the comfort of your home, with coffee in hand, and without having to search for a parking spot. Before introducing our next speakers, I would like to take a brief moment to thank our Instructional Technology Department for the countless hours they spent on making this event a reality. And now, without further ado, I am pleased to introduce our keynote speakers. Christy, Kristen, and Joe Merrill share a passion for infusing EdTech into their classrooms. Together, they have a combined 30 plus years of teaching experience, where they collaborate to create engaging lessons that turn into memories for their students. Even though they teach different grades, they share one common goal: learning needs to be interactive. This mindset led them to write a book series, The Interactive Class, which offers a fresh take on traditional strategies and showcasing ways to implement technology that meets the needs of all their students. Without further ado, I give you Christy Kristen and Joe Merrill.
Hello, friends. How are we doing? We hope you guys are all well on this Saturday morning. It's early, but I think as the teachers, we're getting back into the routine of things. We're excited.
This is wonderful. We have a great group of teachers. I'm excited.
This is going to be a blast. And to echo that message, this has been in the works for a very long time, and you guys are so blessed to have the people behind the scenes at PSJA. They've been working so hard to bring this all together, and we're super excited to be playing a small part in it. There's going to be a day full of learning and full of ideas you can take back to your classroom. So it's going to be a lot of fun.
And like they said, you can have your coffee in hand. So I'm here for it. So when there's coffee, I'm here.
And you didn't have to fight for that parking spot.
I didn't have to fight for the parking spot. That is so true. You can tell they know they're educators. But we are like you echo what you said. We're really excited to be here with you. We are kind of in the throngs of it along with all of you. We've just been getting to move into our classroom this week. And as they said, we are in-class educators. I am a middle school language arts teacher, and my husband's going to be teaching third grade this year. So we're really just excited to share our love of technology with you, our love of learning and creativity, which has kind of led to this keynote and the topics behind it. So the idea of creativity, I think, is something that has been a little bit lost in the last couple of years. People have been a little bit worried about what's going on with creativity, and AI is going to steal everyone's creativity, and AI is going to steal everybody's jobs. And, we kind of go like the full pendulum swing when something new comes into our teaching world. And I think, if I'm honest, I felt the same way. When AI started coming out, we kind of tend to take new things very differently. He likes to jump in, cannonball, start playing, and I tend to be on the side that feels a little bit more apprehensive, and I'm slower to jump into new things and to new technology. So when we started thinking about this keynote, it was a really nice blend of why we both feel that way as educators. Why are you so willing to jump in, and why am I so scared? And why do people feel that way and that they don't have to?
Yeah, I think that when you look at it in hindsight, I think that COVID really changed a lot for us. And so that was a time where we felt like we really had to learn all these different types of digital platforms. And then when we came out of that, we kind of found ourselves pulling back on some of that. And now that we're in this AI era, we're kind of trying to figure out, how does that all blend together? And so we are really looking at the past to kind of come back up to the surface in this. And so that's kind of what we're going to be talking about today. And with creativity, that's taken a very soft spot in our heart.
Yeah, so creativity is more than a buzzword. It's not something that is new. It's not something that we have to figure out. And so we wanted to start today with the idea of what does creativity look like? When we say the word creativity, it's not a hard word. It's not one of those hard acronyms as teachers that we have to learn. But
It's not rigorous, you're saying?
oh, that's one in our district. Be nice, rigor, right? But what does creativity look like? We all seem to, know what it means and have an idea. But what kind of words start coming to your brain when you think of creativity? For me, oftentimes I think it's like art. You gotta draw. You gotta draw to be creative.
Yeah.
You have to do visual design. You have to be musical, or maybe dance. You have to design something like, I think like Hamilton from scratch. Like I'm like, oh nope, that mountain is too high for me, right? But it can also be through things that we see in our classrooms.
For me, it's more of the process of making something, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so when you're using creativity, it involves some type of making, some types of hands-on, some type of higher level thinking that goes behind it. And I think that when you look at some of these other terms that are on the screen here, a lot of those ideas involve a process. And so I think that creativity really focuses on the process of doing things, and some of these different ideas really do involve that.
Yeah, and so it's very easy to see how, as even adults, we can look at some of these buzzwords or things that go with creativity and think, I'm not creative. I can't do that. I don't know about that type of learning or that, and we build it up into something bigger than what it really is. So I want to ask everyone watching a question, like, do you think this, can you go to the next slide, please?
Oh, sorry, I was looking at the chat.
Yeah.
I thought you were getting ready to ask
Sorry,
somebody
no,
something.
no. Do you think this is creative? This picture, this drawing, I could call it?
Yeah, when you look at this illustration, maybe we'll call it that,
Yeah.
for lack of a better term, do you think there's creativity that goes behind this? Let us know in the chat. We'd love to know
What do you think of when you see it? Who do you think drew it?
And for all of you guys that are thinking, no, I did not draw that. Okay, but thank you. I like to think I'm a little bit better off of an artist than that. Yes, maybe it was you. So would you have called this creativity, Kristen?
I would like to say now I would, but I think a couple years ago I wouldn't have.
That's a great point. So what makes you think that you wouldn't have called it creative a couple years ago?
The old me would have probably thought it was rushed. Maybe it wasn't planned out enough. I'm a planner. I'm a very type A person. That maybe there was a lot going on. There might even be, when you look at it, like there's almost like the starting of something and they stopped and they tried it again. So to me, it's like not final. It's not, I hate to say it, but it's like not perfect, right? It's not the finished product.
It doesn't have all the polished colors and everything that you would hope for, right?
In my head.
But are those the things that make it creative?
No. And that's why now I would say, yes, it's very creative.
When we look at this picture, this was a picture that was drawn by a 3-year-old. And so if you were to look at this picture like all of us are, and we're really trying to decipher what's going on here, it would be pretty complicated for us to be able to sit there and say, this is what's happening. Yeah. But when that 3-year-old gave this to us and explained what was happening, it makes perfect sense. This is a set of stairs that humans are walking down. Now, as you can imagine, that would be pretty difficult for a 3-year-old to illustrate, but them being able to then explain every single detail of that illustration is where the true creativity lies.
So when you really look at it from behind the scenes, there was an idea, there was something that needed to be communicated, it was drawn out, and then the child was able to speak and explain what was going on in the picture. There's a huge process there.
Yeah, the student's explanation of the work is just as powerful as the actual piece itself. Creativity is more than just the crayons and the paint and the hands-on material, like we said. It really is that explanation and that point that gets driven home.
So what we're going to look at today is this idea that creativity really hasn't changed, but how we recognize it, how we see it, how we nurture it, has to change. And that's not because we're not good teachers. It's not because our classrooms and schools are feeling, it's because our world is changing. Our world is changing. And not what creativity really is changing, but the way we interact with our world is definitely not the same. I was at an appointment yesterday, and the women who run the place I was at are all young. They're probably younger than 28, between like 20 and 28. And we had this whole conversation of like phone book and maps that went on your phone. And like, it was really funny, like as we were going through it, but my brain was thinking like, wow, like I feel so old. Like all of these things that have come through in just my generation. And since I was a kid, how I learned and how the kids learn now isn't because the way I learned was bad. It's because the world I live in is different. And so what we want to think about is, are we really trying to redefine creativity, or are we trying to recognize it where we live?
Yeah, and that's a great question. And I think that it's something that we all have to really reflect on is, when we look at what we're planning in our lessons and how we're designing our content, how are we going about that? Are we really just trying to make students redefine the actual creation, or are we actually going to recognize the process that goes behind being creative?
So there is a risk here, teachers. The risk is that you might try to redefine creativity in the sense that you might be trying to give it a new name, give it a new picture in your head, give it a new process, right? It's not a new concept. We don't have to keep up with the times in the sense of redefining it. It's timeless. It's always been relevant and it's always been present. I just think it's lost its focus with everything that everyone can do, and that's where that fear has crept in that we're going to lose it.
Yeah, and I think that when you look at creativity too, that it's just not something that pops into your head quickly. So the process that goes behind that, it really is powerful for our students. And when things don't pan out, you're still learning through that entire process. The other thing that's important to point out is that no types of creativity are the same, right? Your creativity is going to be different than my creativity. And when you can bring those together, let's say in a classroom setting, what you're really doing is you're sharing different ways of thinking. And that is extremely powerful when it comes to learning, because being able to see what your friends did and what you did is truly powerful in a sense where maybe they may not be as engaged if the teacher is doing it.
And it's really important to understand that your students don't necessarily have the same creative thinking as you do. So we have a child who has a hard time paying attention auditorily. He fidgets a lot, but he is the classic textbook kid that he looks like he's absolutely not paying attention at all to anything. And you stop, and if you ask him, he can tell you exactly what you just said. And how many times have I had kids like that in my class that I thought they weren't paying attention and I didn't let them draw, or I didn't let them fidget, or I didn't let them do those things. Now, don't get me wrong, there's some kids that just fidget and are not listening, right? And it's our job as a teacher to know our students, and we have that relationship and we know who they are and we know how they learn and we know what they like. We'll start seeing this creativity in a lot of places that we maybe necessarily didn't see it before.
And a lot of those ways that we're going to see it is in their thinking, in their risk taking, and in their expression. So all three of these things are helping to define what creation and creativity really does look like.
So let's talk about thinking. How do we see creativity and thinking? Well, in that picture that you just saw, that child drew the picture several times. There were some people that didn't quite have all their things finished, right? It's this process of, what do I want to communicate through my blank? What do I want to communicate through my essay? What do I want to communicate through my art? What do I want to communicate through my chatbot conversation, right? So there's a process of thinking, and if you slow down enough to let your kids think through that, instead of always just jumping to the rubric, or always sometimes they want to go completely backwards. Sometimes well, what if I have the conversation they're they've died, and I'm oh, well, that's interesting. I guess you could, right? And so sometimes creativity comes in the way people approach problems. We are currently setting up our classrooms, and we think completely opposite, right? I wanted all my boxes in my room, and I wanted to open them as they were kind of labeled, and then I'll bring some more stuff in. And he's I want all the boxes in at one time, right? So the thinking process of how we approach that was totally different. Neither one was wrong.
Yeah, and I think that when you look at these three different categories, for lack of a better term, the thinking part is the part that your students are going to live in the longest, right? That is going to involve the longest process. And so when they're in that thinking category, what they're really doing is they're leading up to the second, right? And so when your students are maybe designing a PowerPoint slide or a slide deck for a back to school event, they're actually going through and they're thinking, okay, how do, like Kristen mentioned, how do I want this to look? What does this need to communicate? What's the most important parts that I need to go through? All that's part of the thinking, right? And then it kind of leads up and ropes to the rest of it.
And when do you think of most of your best ideas? When I think of them, when I'm getting ready in the morning. When it's quiet, when I'm on a walk.
That is not when I have my
when I'm walking the dog. When there's no one around that I can talk to because I am in my head thinking, right? And I think I'm very guilty of this as a teacher. I've tried really hard in the last couple of years to not take away that time with my students, because it's a real thing. We are stressed. We have a lot on our plates. They're adding more. The expectation sometimes can be a little bit unreal. And so this tends to be the thing that gets, we gotta go, we gotta go, we gotta go. The second thing about that we feel like when you want to see creativity is this idea of like risk taking. And this is really hard for students. And I'm going to be honest, this is really hard for teachers. I hear often, well, that program seems really cool, but I don't know how to use it. So like, I can't. I just can't jump in with it with my kids. And we're sometimes afraid of maybe messing up or maybe things not looking right. And if we can take risks with our kids and fail and things don't go well, we create a culture where our kids feel comfortable, right? And so a lot of times when I ask my students to do things that are creative, whether it's in writing, I write along with them. And mine's right under the camera. So they can see me like as I'm processing my thoughts, as I'm crossing things off. They can see that I'm struggling with the same things that they're struggling with. If I'm doing a project in Canva, I may create kind of a design with them or start, and right, I do and build and work along with them and show them those kinds of risks. And I try my best to allow those kids that come to you and like, okay, you might say no to this, to try to say yes if I can, right? If it's still going to get them to that end learning goal, to allow them to kind of branch up. Now you will also have the students who like go way too far and you have to like kind of rope them in, be like, hey, that's not probably realistic for what we have, planned, but I'd love for you to take that home and bring it back when you're finished.
I feel like, at least in my experience, this is the hardest for the students, right? Because they want to get the projects done oftentimes so quickly. They want to just be done with it and they want to accomplish the task and check it off. But the risk taking is where you truly can push the boundaries of the thinking. And so encouraging your students to just not settle for what's the end product, but rather like leveling up that end product, that's where this lies. And so being able to play around in this area, make it messy, but also at the same time organized, is where there's really, really a lot of power.
Yeah, and I see with our own children, right? How often do they like not want to take that elective in high school because they don't know anything about it, right? Well,
Or it's too hard. It is asking too much.
I don't know this and I'm scared to try. Well, that's the whole beauty of it, right? Because then what happens is that risk taking leads to expression. And so now you're learning skills, like in our son's case, like you're learning skills so that you can then express yourself and express. I'm thinking about what he told us last night, and he likes to edit videos and do things, and he came down and like he was telling jokes through these things. He was kind of like razzing on friends, and it's all through his video creation that he didn't even know if he could really do, right? Like how often, you teach your kids to take risks and say, okay, it's not perfect, and then that one kid doodles something at home, like sharing something about their life maybe that is really hard, but they felt comfortable enough to express it because it didn't have to be perfect, right? Like the expression comes once you realize that you're in that safe space and you can take the risks and you've had the time to think it through. And so you kind of need all of them in this nice little melting pot.
Yeah, and so just understand it's going to be messy, it's going to be loud, it's probably
not always
loud, it can sometimes be quiet.
Type A, type B, not
always. And it may not always be polished. And so I think that it's really important to take all those things in when you're really considering all of the creation side. But it's also just very easy to get wrapped up in all of those things.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you get wrapped up in that, oftentimes we can overthink what we're actually trying to do.
Often. I do it all the time. How often do we overthink what we're doing, think something has to take longer than it really does? I overthink things a lot. And sometimes the best learning comes from those moments where you just let the kids do, or you go with the backup plan, or you try something a little bit different. And I think in terms of creativity, and even as like EdTech as a whole, sometimes I think we overthink how much we have to do and how much we have to use, and then it leads us to the classic, this is too much, I just can't do that. Like I can't put this on my plate. When in reality, I don't think it has to be quite that.
Yeah, and I think with EdTech especially, it's a slippery slope because sometimes we think that it has to be new to be relevant, and that's not always the case.
So good.
There are plenty of other tools that have been around for a very long time that we are still using, shockingly, actually, to be forthright.
You're going to see it in our sessions today, and our lunch and learn. Like, we're not looking to reinvent the wheel. We'll use something if it comes. That's such a good point.
And there's often times where we'll go away from a tool for a couple of years, and then we'll say, man, you know what? Like, we need this. So we'll put that tool back in our toolbox. So, old ideas can be revived and repurposed to produce creative results. And so I guess the point that we're trying to drive home here is that when you get to this planning part, you want to make sure that you're not just rushing through it, and you want to make sure that you're taking the time to think through it all.
So this is a really like generic quote. I know, I get it. But creativity is intelligence having fun. And it goes exactly with what you're saying right now. When you are being creative, it's not necessarily that you're doing it perfectly and or it's something brand new, but you're enjoying the process you're going through. And if you've ever did a deep dive, and I did a couple nights ago, and I'm not going into it now, but Albert Einstein had a rough life. Like, he wasn't this like genius that everyone thinks that everything went perfect. He had a bunch of money, and no, like a lot of people thought he was mad. And if you read about his home life, like there's a lot of things he invented didn't work the first time. Like, his life wasn't just rainbows and unicorns, right? But for someone like that to be like, creativity is having fun, he understood, right? You enjoy what you're doing, you enjoy the process, you don't scare yourself through it, and then the work comes out of it. If you stop the minute you think it's wrong, or you stop the minute it gets hard, you're never going to invent it. You're never going to get there.
Yeah, and so when you look at projects like ones that maybe you did growing up, like the trifold science board, right? There's so many creative outlets that you can use on a board like that.
And there's nothing wrong with them.
There's absolutely nothing wrong with them.
We still sometimes use them, but
there's been a transition, right? And so now students can use a lot of the techniques that they were using for those boards digitally. They can save on some of those different types of expenses that maybe they needed to create the boards. And they're able to produce a quality product that they have complete control over, and they're not limited to just a threefold triboard.
I really like that that infinite. So the example here is like a walking museum tour. It's kind of like what that lesson is. It's built in Canva, and my middle schoolers did it. They built each room in the museum, and then they talk through it like they're the dossiers, right? And so this is a perfect example of how both are fine, both get you to the learning goal, but how our world has changed, and our digital, visual, quick-paced learners, one might fit them. They might see themselves better in one than the other. So as teachers, if our risk is that we're trying to redefine creativity, the way we avoid this is to stop trying to redefine it and to recognize it. Right? It's not that our students can't be creative or build cool things. It's just how we demonstrate it, and the tools we use, that process is changing.
And you just said the key word there. It's the process, right? We want to try to move away from the product-based learning to the process-based creativity. And so when you're looking at the product, you're really just looking at one piece. You're looking at that final product that the student has made. But if you're looking at a creative side, you're actually going from the process. And so you're factoring in assessments from everything from where they started, including to where they wrapped it up.
And I have to say, just a little bit of background, we have worked in a district for a long time who did traditional grading, and we are now at a school that does traditional grading. But for probably like a 6 or 7 year period, we worked in our district where we did standards-based grading, which is not a grade for everything. You teach the same concept like over and over and over again, with that idea that they build, and at the end, they've mastered it. And it was really hard to learn it at first. It was such a hard mind shift. I hated every second of it. And now I'm so grateful, though, because now I'm able to do something like that and say, hopefully you get there, and I can still grade you as you go. And so this idea that it's going to be done the first time probably isn't realistic, but there are some ways, little things you can do in your class to kind of start helping that creativity come through.
So here are some ways that we like to think about creativity when we're putting it into our classrooms. We love to remix different projects, right? So not everybody has that, or I shouldn't say, everybody probably has a way to be creative in their talents and their outlets, but a lot of people don't think they have that. And so sometimes what they like to do is they like to borrow ideas or find inspiration from other places, and that involves maybe things like remixing. So for example, if you're using Canva or Adobe Express or one of those other tools, you can very easily most likely find a template that's going to have that idea started for you, so you're not wasting time having your students with the building of the background of it all, but you're spending more time on the important parts of it. So like, what's the actual content that's going to live within that project?
I'd say like 70% of what we do is remixing, right? We scour, different platforms and look at different ideas. And, the 5th grade science teacher, what she's doing doesn't really apply to me in 7th grade language arts, but the method of what she did, might inspire me and be like, oh, well, I could do that with blank, right? And so I can remix her idea. I can take her idea and shift it to make something that helps me and achieve my learning goal, but does it in a way that I didn't have to create the whole thing. Now, reimagining does create the whole thing, but it is fun every so often just to completely reimagine something.
Yeah, I think when you are looking at reimagining, it really is that level up. And so the students are having to think beyond what is just being asked. And so that's really it's a key component in that learning process. And the thing about it too is that this is not always going to be a loud and a flashy part of their learning. But what this does is it really demonstrates a higher level of understanding.
I agree. And coding we put in there because let's face it, in the world we live in, that it's not going away. And it's a actual skill or thing that a student could be using to, in many ways. Yes, you can code a game, you can code a website, you can code all sorts of different things. And there's a lot of platforms that are free that students can work on at home too, if you don't have the time in your classroom to do it. But starting from complete scratch and then building something that works is a skill that's going to help you in your math class too. When you sit down with a problem and you don't know how to do it, it's going to be a skill that helps you in your chemistry class in high school when you're supposed to get some outcome and it didn't work and you're like, okay, well, let's go back there through our steps and see what happened. Like, that's building code, right? And so there's a lot of soft skills that come with something that's so techy like coding that really can translate into other areas of a child's learning without them even knowing.
And when you say soft skills, explain that to me.
Oh yeah, so soft skills is like a terminology for things that aren't necessarily standard content based, perhaps, but they are skills that our students need to be successful in the real world. So whether it's problem solving, persistence, collaborating with others, working overtime, design thinking, all of those things, you can't measure it, you can't really grade it per se, but it's a skill that just comes along with whatever you're doing. So I might be coding a game that goes with a novel and they're retelling the order of a story, but there's a lot of other skills that they're not getting graded on that they're going to be strengthening by doing it in that method.
Yeah, and I think that when you look at these examples that are on there, you know, when you talk about the soft skills, there's so many things that you can double dip on sometimes that I think as a teacher, we skip over that and we don't realize like how much our students are doing. And again, going back to the process. And so it's important to take that into consideration too. Like how much processing are they really doing without necessarily worrying about what they're building with the content, right? Copying, pasting, cutting, all those different skills, those are involved in that processing. So it's important to keep that in mind too.
And it builds their confidence and it builds that creativity because at the end, they know what all those things they've gone through that maybe everyone else didn't see. And it builds that level of, oh, I could do that. And like, where can that translate in other places in your classroom?
Right. And so speaking of that,
so look differently. How can we see this?
Creativity just looks different, right? There's new lenses that we can look through our content with, and there's lots of platforms out there that are supportive of creation in the classroom. And these are just a couple of our favorites. And these all have a free aspect. They also have a paid, some of them have a paid version, but you can get started with these today. We'll be talking about some of these in our sessions later, but we just want to throw out some examples for you, maybe like when you're looking about how to get started with creation in the classroom. If you're using one of these, chances are you may, if you're here, you probably are. These are a great way to get started with it.
So you've got Book Creator, Padlet, Canva, and Adobe. And I think oftentimes we tend to go to like printed things, like a printed book or a printed flyer, or which is great. That's what our students are used to. But a lot of these platforms are creating so many more things. We're going to talk about them in our sessions later today, like podcasting, like silent films. Like that would be so clutch for an 8th grade class to sit and be like, you have to, demonstrate in a silent film. They don't know how to be silent. That's not their world they live in, right? Even goes far and make it black and white, right? But there's a lot of things that you might see a platform like, oh, I'm already familiar with that. And all you have to do is like tweak the project that you build inside of it.
Right. Yeah. And so things like with Padlet, you can use what's called Padlet Sandbox, which is built inside of it. And there's all types of opportunities there. Canva is pretty much, I think in Adobe Express, we're familiar with those. And so those are obviously ones that you can do. But let's think back to how we were talking before. Like, what if you started from, let's just say like a diorama, right? And so diorama, did I say that right?
I say diorama.
Diorama.
But we don't agree
tomato, whatever. Let us know in the chat what you think. So if you think back to when we used to make those, and I think a lot of us still probably do those, there's still an enormous amount of creativity that went into those projects. And so you really had to think about those.
Disclaimer, we are not saying that any of these older kind of then projects are poor. Like they're great. I have probably done and still do many of them now. But a lot of them did become product-based. So in this example, create a diorama, right? It's fun. It's artistic. You get to take your mom to the craft store and buy all the supplies. I love when my kids tell me the night before they have a diorama to do, right? But it's a product. It's something that at the end time, and when you go to grade it, you're grading that thing they've created. Well, one simple kind of switch, what if you put yourself in the diorama? What if you used Canva, you created a video, and you took a picture of your diorama, you still made it, and then you dropped yourself into it, took out the background on your video, and you walked through your diorama and you explained it. Now it's a whole process, right? Now you've got a whole explanation process, and the child is there doing it, right? Because we know sometimes that parents like to help on projects, and it's not bad, but it does happen, right? And so now you've gone from this product thing that I'm turning into this whole process of a project.
And I think that oftentimes as educators, we look at this and we're like, oh, I don't know if I'm going to have the time to do that. And we completely understand that. But again, this goes and hammers down that point of it's really the process that goes behind the learning. You can use each step as an assessment piece in trying to work up towards that final target and their learning goal, and being able to level it up by doing something like putting yourself in the actual artwork that they created, that they went through that whole process, is just the level up of the actual student voice. And so there's so much potential with an activity like this that it's extremely powerful for students in their learning learning the path, I guess you could say. Sorry, I love
Yeah, you got really like.
Sorry. Next up, essays. Listen, essays, they're important. We all need to be.
Don't knock them. I write essays. Yeah. We write essays a lot in my class. It's a real thing.
And so a lot of times, especially like in my grade level, we have students that are dreading the times that they have to go to writing and start working on some of those essays. And I'm not going to lie to you, oftentimes we have to dangle a little carrot over them and kind of give them a little bit of incentive to get it going. But once they do start to get those juices going and those creative ideas flowing, there's a lot of possibilities to even take those essays and make them even more creative.
Well, one thing I hear a lot too is kids will say like, when am I ever going to use this? Our kids say that all the time. When am I going to use this in my real job? Right? And then in reality, when was the last time I had to write an essay for my job? Not recently. I mean, I need the skills that I need to write the essay. I use those skills every day. And so transform that thinking, right? The world we live in is a little bit different. How do we communicate in our world today? Because writing is just a form of communication. Well, we communicate in video, right? So you could make a newscast and you could talk through it. We listen to podcasts, right? And anyone who thinks podcasting doesn't have writing assigned to it when you're creating it is a phony, because there's a lot of writing. And so writing podcasts is a really fun way to kind of like trick your kids into that beginning, what we talked about earlier, that process of thinking through something, because they'll be like, okay, you can be very simple. Like you have to make a 5-minute podcast. Like, wait, 5 minutes, nothing, right? 5-minute podcast on blank. And they're like, okay, I'm ready. I'm going to go. And they record and they come back. I'm like, how was it? It was 47 seconds. You're like, yeah, you got a lot more to think about. Let's think through what you want to say. And do you feel more comfortable if you write it down? And there's a whole bunch of writing and planning and processing and editing that goes into that. But it feels so much more real world. And then remember those soft skills. Now I'm getting to like edit a video, and I'm getting to use microphones and sound equipment. And I'm getting to learn some of these other things that I know I'm going to use somewhere in my life in my writing assignment.
I'll also say, if you listen to podcasts and you don't think that there's writing behind that, you are not really listening to it the right way, because there's definitely writing behind that. Yeah, I was trying to echo your point, because there's going to be some type of script that's always behind the background of that. So maybe you want to do something like that, lead into that podcast angle where you say like, this is going to turn into that. So that's really powerful. How about things like cereal boxes?
The cereal box projects. I mean, there's nothing wrong with them. I mean, you have to eat a lot of cereal to get the boxes.
I'm not complaining about that.
I know you
but those also include a lot of creative elements, and so it's transforming the actual box itself and making sure that the different types of elements that are on that box are relevant to the actual content that they're presenting on. And then there was always that presenting side where you had to go back and explain what it was that you did and why it was there. So that student voice angle is still part of that project, but maybe you don't have access to all of those materials and you want something that everybody does have access to. Maybe you want everyone to have the same access to it all, make it equitable. Yeah. And so that's where technology can help. And so bringing in some types of technology, and you can do this in a variety of tools.
Oh, yeah.
But being able to create a bento box, right, is very similar to the cereal box.
And for me, being a type A teacher and a type A student, I hated things like cereal boxes, because if I wrote one letter wrong on that cereal box, I had to do the whole thing again. right? And because to me, the way it was presented, it had this like, so, and some kids could care less. They just write on it like our kids and we're done. But what's cool to me about a bento box is that it's the placement of things, but really the real grading comes when you talk about it, right? Where you talk about the things. And plus you can put so many more things in there that you might not have access to from, going to Michael's and getting stickers or, right? And so you go and you put these items in your bento box and you sit and talk about how they relate to that story. And we were talking about remixing. You could do something really simple where you give the kids the template with the book already in it. If they've all read the same thing, you could give them the creativity on how it looks, right? So depending on your learners, depending on their familiarity with the project or the platform you're working on. As a teacher, maybe you do a bento box for the read aloud you're doing, not the book they're doing, and model it, right? And show the creativity. But the idea is there's a lot of soft skills that go into taking out backgrounds and doing things like that. You could screen record over this. You could still present it in front of your classroom.
Yep.
You could still have them put it up and do that public speaking, right? Those things that we feel like technology takes away. But again, the skills and the platforms that they're learning are part of this world. And it opens it up and makes it more equitable, not only in materials, but in the way you think and process. And think about that kid that drew and like had all those mess ups on the cereal box. You're redoing and redoing, and you're learning to hate what you're doing. Here, you're just like, oh, I don't want that. I want this instead. And it's a much freer place to take risks.
Yeah, and I think students will be more likely to take those risks because of the ease of it all too. And so,
Yep.
When you look at all of these projects, again, it's about the process. It's about the experience that goes behind it. Because when you look at creation and creativity, it needs the space to breathe. It can't just be a spot in your schedule. You can't just say, oh, my students are going to create a project on Monday, and then we're going to present it at the end of the day. Chances are that's not going to be best practice.
And this is where I think when you look at STEM programs, there are some schools and districts that have thriving STEM programs, and there's some that don't. And to me, it's where, how is that culture being put into your whole space, right? Your classes, your school, are they coming every day and like, this is my STEM class and this is my box that I do STEM in, and I go and I leave it? Or is it being infused in everything you do, right? Are you giving your kids room to be creative on the playground when they have like sticks and they're making like a little teepee and they want it to all not fall over? Are you being like, don't play with the sticks, right? It sounds silly, but it has to have a place where it can kind of just breathe out and infuse itself into everything. Not just be a little bullet on my lesson plan where my administrator says I have to put in blank. And I know that's hard, and I know that some people do have to put that in, but the more that we can see creativity outside of just the materials we use, I think we'll be seeing that if we're being honest with ourselves, sometimes we're smushing it, right? When those kids do compensate, well, can I do it like this? And you're like, no, we've smushed it, right? Instead of giving that child the space to maybe do it in a different way that really doesn't affect us and our grading and everything else. And oftentimes the kids that ask that, the thing they're asking for is harder. It takes more time. Like they're not trying to get creativity. Very rarely ever gets you out of doing something faster. It usually involves more because it's a process.
Yeah, and I think that when you think about how this is going to work in terms of you as the educator, a lot of times we just have to get creative with our scheduling and rethinking our actual structure. And so when you do that, you have to maybe factor in how this is going to work and how things are going to have to change.
Being rigid. I was such a rigid teacher when I started. And to no fault of anyone's, I just followed the structures and the formats that came between. And I know this isn't super creative, like artistic-y wise, but I will never forget the day as I was sitting in my room and I had that was my fourth grade classroom, and I had the little center signs hanging from the ceiling because we had 4 centers in reading that the kids always rotated through and they always went to. And I was trying to think of the projects to put into that. And I thought, like this kid I can't think of a project that all the kids could go to through that center, right? And it just dawned on me like, well, why do I have to have 4 centers? Why does every kid have to go to all 4? Who said that? Who made that rule? And I asked everyone, no one could tell me. It wasn't like I stopped. I was like, well, this is silly. We're going to have as many centers as I want, and we're going to make it through. And so I was like, I don't have to do it that way. And I still remember it. Like, I'm not going to tell you how many years later because that will age me, but that was a really defining moment in teaching of that. I don't have to have everything be rigid just because everyone behind me or in front of me says so. There are times like grading or testing, there are things that need to be rigid, but not everything does. I mean, you can let go of that it allows room for so much more creative thinking to come in.
Yeah, and I think that to echo off of what we've been talking about the whole time, it's going to provide more choice for your students, and it's also going to nail home that reflection side of it. And so, kind of rethinking how we can incorporate those types of strategies within the instruction and to give the time in our lessons to have those things living is going to be extremely powerful for our students. But it's not always going to be polished like we've been saying. Sometimes you're going to have problems, right? There's going to be failure. So what does failure in a creative classroom look like? Well, failure in a creative classroom could mean having to redo certain things.
I was going to say that. I was like, failure looks like not like sliding the lesson to the next day because like none of the computers loaded and you couldn't get anyone in, or the pictures wouldn't, like failure always comes first, like it always does.
And I think that the only way that you can make it work is to kind of dip down to the next one, which is being flexible, right?
Look at it flexibility, not failure, because that makes it sound really bad.
If you're finding that your class is really having a hard time grasping a certain concept, it's very easy to just give up on that. But it's going to be so much more powerful if you stick to it, and maybe you just get a little bit more flexible with how you've planned out the rest of that unit. And then, of course, the icing on the cake is always going to be the student voice, because back to that picture that the toddler drew, at face value, we have no idea what it really means, right? But when that was explained to us, we can truly understand and grasp the overall thinking of that student.
And the students will have more confidence to tell you what they liked, and to tell you what they didn't like, and to tell you what worked well for them, and things that they want to do again. I think we sometimes miss those conversations, and kids are not going to tell you because they don't want to hurt your feelings. They don't want to get in trouble. But to be like, hey, okay, so we just did this platform and this project in blank. What are your thoughts? You could do it as a discussion. You could do it as a simple little form where kids like anonymously get to fill it out. I've done it a lot, and sometimes I think something is like stellar, and it was like, and they don't like it. And then there's times that I think something was a complete failure and it was awful, and they're like, that was great. Can we do that again? Right? And so not only letting our students share their thinking, but also like be owners of that learning space, right? That's all of the books we've written are about this interactive relationship, right? Where they feel safe enough to come to you and be respectful, but be like, that was really hard for me, or I liked that, or can we try doing it like this next time? Because now you've got them in, and now they're bought into that learning.
Yeah, so you have to make space for creativity. And so that is something that we hope that you walk out of this session and you realize, like, listen, it's not just going to happen overnight. It's got to be something that is a process. And so having that space is going to be key to developing those skills and to taking thinking to the next level. And, it reminds me a lot of your plants.
On so many different levels. So we were trying to think of a way to explain, like, making space for creativity, and I kept coming back to this idea of like, I'm not good, I'm not creative, I can't do that. And growing plants was kind of something the same way. Like, I killed everything that like came into our house, and then within the last year I started growing plants, and I started one at a time, and now these plants are massive and these plants are beautiful, and I look at them and I'm like, oh, I grew that. But how did I grow that? I go out there every morning like an old lady, and I like look at them. I just walk. I walk out there with my coffee, and I like look at all of them every day, and then I water them. And sometimes I change where they are, on the porch because they're getting too much light. I invest time, right? I've made space in my day. Now it's like 5 minutes of time. Like, it's not a lot of time, but I've made space in my day to give attention to all of these plants. And what happens to a plant when you give it the time and the watering and the attention it deserves? They grow massive, right? They have grown so massive that now they are like all outside. Like, I have a jungle. It's like a jungle outside, right? But when you give space for creativity, it's kind of the same thing. Like, you won't know what you're doing at first. You won't know what to look for. You might fail and things will die, and you have to like try it again. You might try a platform and you don't like it, but the person next door uses it every day, and you're thinking, well, why am I not? But if you can get through that and you can just spend enough time trying to look for it, you're going to realize that it's there, and that you can do it, right? And then you're going to learn, like, with this group of learners I had, like, what, oh, that was too hard. That was too much for them. They gave them too many reins and they got crazier. This wasn't challenging enough. And just like the plants, you're going to learn like what your students need, and then they're going to thrive. And then you're going to be surrounded. That's all you're going to see, right? Is all of this creativity. And now I go outside and I'm like, I don't have any space for any more plants, right? They're so big and they take up so much space. How cool would it be to be able to walk into your classroom every day and be like, I don't have any more space for creativity. Like, I don't have any more space for my students to design because it's just taken over and they've owned it and they're thriving. And to me, it's just like a beautiful analogy to talk about creativity. Plus, I just like talking about my plants.
Obviously.
I love my plants.
So when you get ready to go back into the classroom this year and get your year started with all these new ideas that you might have, we want to make sure that you really think about things a little bit differently. Remember, you're not trying to reinvent the wheel. We're definitely not saying you can't use all those old ideas anymore. You just need to start noticing them differently. It's like, the processing wheel that you see whenever your computer is hanging because it's got to think about it a little bit too long. Maybe you're asking it to do a little too much in that moment and it's got to think through it. Same idea, right? And so just being able to have time for your students to process those ideas is truly the challenge.
So you can do this in a couple of ways. Maybe look at your environment, like look around and look at the space that you have and think like, how can I make my room more creative? Like that's what we're in the process right now with all the boxes. We're like, okay, what do I want my space to be? I teach reading. Do I have a space where my kids can sit and read? Do I have a place where my kids get to books? Do I have a place where they can sit and talk, right? If I teach science, do I have a big space where I can make a mess and do all of those things? And so your tools, the things you're using, how does that work? And then the types of activities you're planning. Like I think you can do it in like small steps. You don't have to like go rechange everything.
Yeah, and so one last point before we leave you guys for the morning is we want to make sure that you know that creativity isn't a buzzword, it's a birthright. And so think about that maybe as you go into the day and learning, and we hope that these ideas resonate with you. And if you have any questions, we would love to hear from you. We love connecting with educators. So if you have any questions, you can find us on our website and get a hold of us that way or on social. And we would love to learn from you and hear from you and see your ideas.
Hopefully we'll see you later today in some sessions.